Okay, welcome back from answering question number 3 there in your assignment. I do want to explain tribalism and why it's such a problem here in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, though, this term can apply to really any group, okay? It can even be for political factions, but really a term came about, this human geography term from tribalism, okay? So let's just look at the map right here very closely. You can clearly see that there are different tribes, ancient tribes here in sub-Saharan Africa, but yet some are divided between countries. And look at this one here in North Africa. Look at all these here in Nigeria. Look at this here in Angola. Look at the one here in Namibia and Angola. A lot of different tribes here. Now, with Western European colonization, though, okay, they of course divide up sub-Saharan Africa. So at the Berlin Conference of 1884, 1885, okay, the British, the Germans, the Dutch, the French, a little bit of Spanish and French too, divided up. Remember, Eastern Europe and also even portions of Southern Europe did not colonize it, and even not all Western European countries did, like Switzerland and Austria did not colonize sub-Saharan Africa. But with them doing this, okay, they even follow traditional boundaries, traditional cultural and ethnic differences, but also, too, grouped together tribes that never gotten along and even separated tribes altogether. So the question is, what is the definition of tribalism? Tribalism means is when you're more loyal to your tribe or people of same ethnicity, religion, etc., than your country as a whole. So you're more loyal to the people that are similar to you than your country as a whole. Now, this has created problems. That's why you've had dictators throughout sub-Saharan Africa, because they claim they can keep the countries united. That's why you've had civil wars throughout sub-Saharan Africa in some countries. Again, not all countries experience this, like Kenya, okay, relatively peaceful country, but you could argue it has created problems, say, in Somalia with the warlords, particularly in 1993 when you had Black Hawk Down. Even in South Africa, you're starting now to have problems too, okay? So again, okay, throughout the whole realm, that's what's led to a lot of these problems and dictators, okay? Because it hampers development. They're more worried about unity than working together to better the country as a whole. So really, tribalism creates more problems, and they're very hard to solve. Because the question is, okay, this person belongs to a tribe that's never gotten along. They're now telling me what to do? No, thank you. So think of it from that perspective, okay? That it's these two tribes that never gotten along for millennia, okay, comparable to what's happened with Israel and Palestine, and they're having somebody lead them. So you have to think of it from that perspective, okay? They're not going to work together. There's going to be dictatorships. And again, it's hard then for other companies wanting to invest. They're like, all this infighting, we don't want to lose our infrastructure. So now going to the language and religion of sub-Saharan Africa, okay? You can see that from this map here, the major overall language family, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see it right here, okay? It is Niger-Congo, okay? Niger-Congo is the dominant one, okay? You can clearly see it right here, okay, throughout, okay? Different up here in North Africa and the Middle East, okay? Now, if you go to South Africa, okay, look very closely here. The major language there is Afrikaans, okay? Afrikaans was actually introduced by the Dutch, okay? It is related to the Dutch language, okay? However, it's very unique, okay? So you see a lot of people of Dutch descent in South Africa speaking that particular language, okay? But Western Europeans also brought their languages too, okay? So I'm going to explain, what they, which languages are brought over. English is the big one, okay? So again, like in Kenya, okay, South Africa, Central African Republic, okay, Nigeria, Ghana, you hear the English language spoken. That was brought over by the British. French is the next one, okay? French particularly here in portions of North Africa. You also hear it down here in portions of Sub-Saharan Africa, again, depending on who colonized it. Portuguese is actually the other one, mainly due to the influence here by Mozambique and also right here, okay, with Angola. So it's quite interesting how Portuguese is also another language there. The only Spanish one was actually Equatorial Guinea and Morocco up here, okay? So again, a lot of people think Spanish. It's actually not. It was only in those two countries where Spanish language was dominant. But then the question goes, okay, why would a Western European language be both a centripetal force and centrifugal force? Well, the reason why it's a uniting force, because think if you had all these different languages there, okay, say in Nigeria, and then you had English that was understood by everybody, that would unite everybody, okay? Because again, you have all these different languages there, so one language there can help unite. But then why would it be a centrifugal force? So you have to think about it. Does everybody actually learn the language? Is it only the elites that learn the language? Is everybody, benefit from learning the language? Okay, so you have to think from that perspective, okay? Only the elites and up to, maybe the middle class will learn it, but what about the poorest of poor? Would they actually learn the English language? Okay, so you have to think a bit from there. Now, if you notice here that North Africa is predominantly Muslim, okay, that goes back from the Arab invasion, okay, in the 600s, okay, that's how that became the dominant religion. But then Sub-Saharan Africa is predominantly Christian. That's from Western European colonization, okay, so that's why, not only is it a physical geographic divide between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, but also a human geography divide, okay, based upon religion. I mean, clearly you can see it there between the two different realms. So, I'm going to talk about colonization, okay? Now, what is the definition of colonialism? Well, colonialism means is when you have one country, they go in, take over territory of another, and they influence it through politically, culturally, and also economically. So it's one area takes over another area, and they influence it politically, culturally, and economically. Okay? And as stated before, every society is colonized at one point in time. Okay? Even in sub-Saharan Africa, the Zulu at one time controlled most of this area right here. Okay? That's why you still have some Zulu influences there. So you can't just say it was Western Europeans that did it. I mean, that's true, but every society has done it. The Ottoman Turks did it. Russians did it when they conquered Siberia. The Chinese did it when they went after, Tibet and that, and also Inner Mongolia. In fact, they even controlled Vietnam and even Laos and Cambodia. So again, every society has done it. Okay, so don't think it's just one society than another. But I'll explain how the Western Europeans, impacted these areas. But I wanted to say it really started, okay, when Portuguese ships came here at the Cape of Good Hope, okay? So that goes back to Magellan, okay? So that goes back to the age of exploration. Now, for a long period of time, Western European colonization was only confined to the coast. It wasn't until the late 1800s that you started to see more and more Western Europeans actually colonize more of sub-Saharan Africa. Okay? And the reason is because you have to look at it from a technological standpoint and diseases. For one, malaria still is big there in sub-Saharan Africa, and Western Europeans, did not have the built-up immunity, so a lot of them died off, okay? Now, I'm not saying people don't die from malaria in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, still are. But again, Western Europeans contracted it and died because they didn't have the built-up immunity. So that's one. But it wasn't just malaria. It was also other diseases, too, that killed them as well, too. Now, again, I'm not saying that all people in sub-Saharan Africa have natural immunities. Again, just more of a tolerance for it than, say, the Western Europeans. Okay, kind of like, Western Europeans came to the New World, like common colds and that would cut off the Aboriginals because, again, they didn't have the built-up immunities, the Aboriginals. So think of it from that aspect, okay? Also, transportation, okay? Railroads were still in their infancy. They weren't able to go further inland. Steamboats were still in their infancy, so they couldn't, really improve with transportation. So they had to wait in order to improve transportation in order for them to, of course, go further inland. Okay? But then Liberia and Ethiopia are the exceptions. So Liberia, because it was a former area where freed American slaves settled. I'll go into that. I'm going to Liberia. And in Ethiopia, they were actually able to hold off the Italians from immigrating it really until World War II, where they were temporarily colonized. But a lot of geographers say that it is also a country that never experienced, true Western European colonization. Okay? Now, one of the horrors that came from sub-Saharan Africa to the New World was the slave trade. Okay? Now, the question that's always asked, did Africans participate in the slave trade? Absolutely. Okay? But the question is, what's the difference between Western Europeans when they did the slave trade versus people in Africa? Well, it's the number, okay? And I think this map here shows the number, okay? When the African tribes did it, at the most, and again, this is saying at the most, maybe 100 people would be captured, okay? Average number was about 30 to 50, okay, if you look at primary documents, okay? That's how many African tribes, when they conquered one another, had as slaves. But when Western Europeans became involved, particularly the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and also the French to an extent, they did it by higher numbers. They did it by in the thousands. We're talking 1,000 to even 5,000 people. So you can see it from the numbers perspective. There's a huge difference between 100 people versus 1,000 to 5,000 people. Okay, quite a huge jump in numbers there. Okay. So what happened is that over 30 million people were displaced here to a New World, particularly in Brazil. Again, that's why I said Brazil has a very unique culture, okay, from the Portuguese and African culture, and of course, more recently in Japanese culture, okay? So again, that is the thing you need to understand is the numbers, okay? The numbers are vastly different there between slaves that are just there within sub-Saharan Africa. Now, slavery ended worldwide in 1803 due to the Industrial Revolution. Because remember, slavery was expensive, okay, and when you had the Industrial Revolution, when you actually had, factories and that producing, that's why it ended worldwide, okay? And in the United States, it at first was dying in the early 1800s, but then it took off once again. And the reason why it did continue before I get into why it ended the United States was because of the cotton gin, okay, which made taking seeds off quicker, so people were getting wealthy, okay, particularly, the plantation owners. And also the demand for tobacco really increased. So that's why slavery continued south of the Mason-Dixon line, but then in states such as New York and Massachusetts, okay, they became more industrialized. Now, the question is, why it ended the United States despite it ending worldwide in 1803? Well, in the United States, it ended because of moral reasons, because we had a civil war that was fought over to end slavery. Okay, now again, I know in history class there's more aspects to it, but we're going to keep it simplified here. And again, it was moral reasons why it ended here in the 1860s. Again, we fought a civil war here to end slavery. Okay, now I do want to explain a little bit about the Western European colonization. Obviously, you saw the impact there with people getting displaced in slavery. One thing that it did lead to was it led to industrialization in the realm. Okay, now granted, not as far as say in Western Europe or even now Europe as a whole or North America or even Central America, but it did had stepping stones for some industrialization occurring, particularly in areas like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. There's no denying that, okay? There's no denying that it laid the foundations for industrialization. I already talked about the languages. Remember, it did help unite sub-countries with a lot of different tribal, languages, not just accents and dialects, but actually different languages, and everybody could communicate with one another. But again, you have to remember, did everybody actually learn the language? It was mostly the elites. What about the poor? Not necessarily. And also, too, religion was an impact. It introduced Christianity. Now, this is something you have to talk to people from the countries. I had some friends from Kenya when I was in college, back in the Stone Age. Okay? There are a lot of people say, well, it took away from traditional religions. That's very true. There's no denying that. However, some say, well, look, especially my friend Juma from Kenya, he said, if it wasn't for the British, I never would have been introduced to Christianity and gone to church. So there's that double-edged sword there. Now that I hear from Juma, I also heard it from a big human geographer at Bowling Green State University, Dr. Johnson Webb. She also brought it up too in class. Okay, so again, there's that, double-edged sword there, where yes, it brought traditional religions, but what about to those that actually embrace, Christianity? Now, you could argue the Arabs did colonize North Africa, but that was in the 600s, and that led to, of course, the, aspects there of Islam being spread into Egypt, Libya, etc. Okay? So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop here. We can do question 4 with this one. Okay, but go ahead and watch it, and then when you're done, took all notes, then make sure that you do log into this next one, because it will be for question number 4.